Yes, ma'am.
On the 25th,
25th?
Sunday,
Sunday, 25th?
we're going to have a potluck at our house after services, and it will be especially for Demi and James.
Okay.
They will have been married, and we're going to celebrate them. I also know that that's when it's going to be right after Brent sing, but that is the only time it fits. So we're just going to do it then. Brent can
Sunday,
join
the
in
25th of June,
right
at
after.
your house after service.
Yes.
Demi and James. Okay.
We just
I'll start out with that.
We'll start announcing it so that people will know.
Okay.
That they'll be here before we know it. Okay. Not, yeah, 25th of June. Yep.
25th of June. And I'm ready to take a chance again. Ready to take it on the line for you. Hey, you want me to keep singing? You want to have a class?
I think we should have a class.
Okay. I knew that'd get you. All right, Book of Daniel. We're rolling along. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, my friends. It's already riding a horse, huh? Oh, yeah. Yeah. All right. Good to see everybody tonight. Good to be here, although I could be napping. We are in the book of Daniel in chapter 5, kind of playing around in there a little bit, and chapter 6 comes right after that. Before we get going here, I have an announcement to make. On June 25th, Sunday, June 25th, there will be a convivio, a gathering, a potluck at the Nichols home after services. Yeah, and it will be for James and Demi as a focus, and so, pardon? Huh? Huh? Yeah, Demi and James and Demi, yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to do that because I was asked to do that. Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, as we come before you with humble hearts, we give you thanks for everything, as Paul instructed us. We thank you for this day of life and for life itself and for the hope that we have of being with you someday. But meanwhile, we are here to serve, and we pray, Lord, that you would give us the insight and understanding to serve you in the very best way possible. We are so grateful for these examples of the past and what they teach us today. We're grateful that you have included these in your word, and we pray that we may learn from the things that happened in the past, be they positive or negative, so that we might be wiser servants of yours in this world. Thank you for every soul that is here tonight, and we pray, Lord, that this time would be used in a manner that would be a glory to you and an eternal benefit to one another. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we proceed through the book of Daniel here, one of the things that I think about in preparing for this class each week, I have notes that I've used in the past, and I find I can't use them now. And the reason for that is that this time around, I really want us to appreciate the story. I mean, I look at those notes and, verse by, and there's some good, there's some valuable things in there, and I certainly use them as they come up in my mind. But I want us to see the story. I want us to get what his point is, as opposed to, okay, verses 1 and 2, da-da-da-da-da. Okay, let's look at verses 3 and 4. And, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm kind of done with that. Okay? So that either means I'm getting old and lazy, or I'm getting wiser, or it means something. But I don't want to do that anymore. I want us to get the story, and we're going to look at some of the details, of course, because that's what makes up the story. So anyway, I just wanted to, so you kind of know what kind of a wavelength I'm on, and so anyway, we're going to be in the 5th chapter and probably in chapter 6 also tonight of the book of Daniel. And we've seen quite a few things occur thus far, and we'll be alluding back to those things, because it all kind of is one big story here. And so as we went into the 5th chapter, we were talking here about the occurrence that happened to Belshazzar, the king, kind of in quotes. He wasn't much of a king, but he was the son of Nabonidus, who was the king at that time, but he was absent. And so he's kind of running things, but he's not running them very well. Okay? He's kind of a strange character in a way, especially as we look at the text and think about really what he had going here. So just by one screen from last week, Nebuchadnezzar died in 562. Belshazzar began to reign in 553 and reigned until 539. Now you're going to hear Belshazzar called the son of Nebuchadnezzar at least a couple of times in here, but Nabonidus is his father. Nebuchadnezzar was not his father. And so I really love it with these kind of things, these kind of ancient writings and that aren't necessarily really clear. God didn't make it a point to really clarify these things. And so, you'll read one commentator or article writer, and they'll talk about how, well, maybe, it wasn't his son, maybe it was his grandson or this or that. And then you have another writer just point blank call him, that's his son. But he's not. Nabonidus was his son. So maybe I don't know, maybe a grandfather. I even thought about Genesis 45:8 and Jeremiah 22 in there, where Joseph was called a father to Pharaoh. He provided. He provided for Egypt and that same kind of an idea of a father in Jeremiah 22. I even thought of that, but I don't know what about that. But we don't need to, because we know what we know. Okay, about that one. Chapter 5 marks the end of Belshazzar's reign, and it's going to be the beginning of the reign of the Persians, the Medes and the Persians, and so we'll talk a bit about that tonight. Babylon fell to Medo-Persia in 539, and of course the end of the chapter there points that out. At the end of chapter 5, Belshazzar is slain, Nabonidus has lost power, and the change is made to the Medo-Persian kingdom. All right. So in the Medo-Persian kingdom, the two principles are, we're going to read about Darius, and also, of course, Cyrus II is going to be very much part of that story. And so as we look at the text then, and we talked a little bit here, talked about the attitude of Belshazzar. And anybody remember how we described Belshazzar's attitude as reflected in the drinking of the wine from the cups and using the utensils from God's temple? Well, what did we say? Do you remember? What does that show about him? What was his attitude toward God? Yeah, he was mocking, and he was kind of challenging him, because we talked about how people back then, even if they conquered a nation and ran, and sacked their temple, they would kind of make up for that by building a temple for that conquered god, because they just had respect for the gods. And this is the day that Belshazzar knew. That's when he lived, and he knew what those kind of things. And yet, while he's partying with these utensils, he's mocking God, and he's kind of challenging him. Well, if you don't like it, do something about it. It's kind of like, it reminded me of that, where people will say something and somebody will step away and go, because they're waiting for they're waiting for the fire from heaven, the lightning to come down and strike you. So I'm going to back off here. Kind of what happened to him, because he was kind of challenging and almost daring God to do something. Okay, and you see that reflected here in the text. So the description of what happened is given to us in verse 4. They drank wine, praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Okay? So they're praising these idol gods using these utensils from the temple of Yahweh. And so that's where that challenging kind of a concept comes into it. So we read about the fingers of a human hand appeared, wrote on the plaster of the wall in the king's palace opposite the lampstand. The king saw the hand as it wrote, and it scared him to death. He's when it says his color changed, I imagine he grew pale, and he was trembling all over, and his knees were knocking, and he was just frightened out of his mind, which I can't blame him for that. And of course, then he is going to call in his guys. Is very much like Nebuchadnezzar in his dreams, where he would call in the astrologers and the Chaldeans and the magicians and whatnot to see if somebody could tell him what's going on. Nebuchadnezzar did that, and now here Belshazzar is doing the same thing. But they always they end up with Daniel every time. Okay, Daniel has a reputation. After that first dream that he interpreted, then when the second one came, but there is someone here, and then the same thing here. The queen is going to say, but there's this Daniel, and so he has a reputation. And so they're going to call him in, and they do. They could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. So one of the things that we see here, sometimes these charts kind of come to my mind as I'm musing over these things. But this is a real brief one. In chapter 2, 10 and 11, there is not a man on earth who, remember that, where no one can, they said. On the other side, the God in heaven who reveals the mysteries. Wise men of my kingdom are not able. But those said, our God whom we serve is able, right? But I have heard that you can. Okay? And so it's, again, you see this theme running through the book, and the more I think about it, and of course I have that time to do that in my study, and to read these things, and these things just kind of come to mind. So just keep seeing these things, this comparison. Now, if you're familiar with the book of Isaiah, you know that in Isaiah, like 43 and 44 in there, where God mocks the idols. And kind of that basic message of God is that we've all heard. They have eyes but they cannot see, and ears they can't hear, and feet but they can't walk, etc. And he kind of mocked the idols, right? Because what can they do? Okay, they can't do anything. So the Most High rules, and that's one of the things here that is really, really, really important. Probably the main theme of the book. So right now, this handwriting, and Daniel's going to tell us about this writing, what it says and what it means here. And so they came in, they couldn't do anything. So Belshazzar's alarmed in verse 9, and his color changed, his lords were perplexed. So the queen Because of the words of the king and his lords came into the banqueting hall, the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom. Okay? Right? So we have another one of these situations that when a human witnesses it, you remember some of the times when people in the Old Testament, especially when an angel would appear and what their response would be? Yeah, we're dead. I mean, I don't know what that would be like, but we sure get well, I can guess, I suppose. My reaction wouldn't be different than theirs was. And so these things are happening. And so there's a man in your kingdom who is the spirit of the holy gods. And we see this holy gods again, over and over again, several times here. And could be translated the holy God, but I'm going to go with the idolatrous viewpoint, okay? Because that's what these individuals know. There is a man in your kingdom who is the spirit of the holy gods. And then she goes back and she tells him this is what happened, okay? And surrounding Daniel. And it says, in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers. All right, so this was a great man. He's a great man, and because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So call him in. So they call him in, and he's going to do just that. Okay? And so as it begins in verse 13, they bring Daniel in. Belteshazzar, I've heard that the spirit of the gods is in you. In verse 14, that light and understanding, excellent wisdom are found in you. And again, the wise men, enchanters, they've all been brought in. They couldn't do anything. Okay? They couldn't. And so he's going to offer a reward to anybody who can, interpret this dream. And so Daniel, in verse 17, with regard to the gifts, he says, let your gifts be for yourself. Give your rewards to another. But I'll read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. But first, he's going to set the scene. Okay? He's going to interpret it, but first he's going to set the scene. Now, if you've read this, you know that Daniel is going to kind of reprimand Belshazzar pretty harshly, pretty sternly, I'll put it that way. And what he's going to tell him, in essence, is, you should know better. I mean, you really should know better than to do what you're doing, to have done what you have done. And he goes back in order to do that, and he takes him back to Nebuchadnezzar, your father. The Most High gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he killed, whom he would he kept alive, whom he would he raised up, and whom he would he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. Now, that is a strong statement. That is a statement that will reverberate through the centuries. Okay? And another thing I thought about this week was, you know, when we talk about being kingdom people, it just, you know, studying a book like this, it really enriches that concept of being in God's kingdom, right? It really does, because he's ruling. And it doesn't matter what anybody says or does, I mean, he is just the sovereign, absolute ruler. Nothing happens without his authority, without his okay. And a statement like we have here, the Most High rules the kingdoms of mankind and sets over it whom he will. That's our king. Okay? And it kind of helps us, and please forgive me for this, but it helps us to further differentiate between the kingdom of God and the church. See? He's the king. He's the ruler. This is his rule, his power, his sovereignty, and he rules over his church. We are the ruled. So there's if you're in the church, you're in the kingdom, right? I'll just, for the sake of argument, vice versa, right? But they're not exactly the same thing. It's a different relationship, okay? Yeah, Steve?
Well, to work on where you're at right now,
Yeah?
Daniel and his mates have total confidence that God's got this.
Mm-hmm.
If I go in the furnace and I'm gone, God's got it.
Yep.
If I go in the furnace and I walk out clean, God's got it.
Yeah.
And so to go to this conversation about the church versus the kingdom, God is fully in control of all of his kingdom.
Yep.
All of it.
Yep.
When we see stuff going on around us and we don't understand, and maybe we're never in our lives ever going to understand it, but one thing we know for sure, God is in complete, total control of everything that's happening here. It's happening in his own time.
Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's right.
And to me that is, and so Daniel kind of takes us there. This book is a great encouragement to us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
With all the, hoorah that's going along right now, one thing we know for sure, God's in complete control of
Yeah.
this.
Yep.
Totally.
Yeah. And this brought up.
Of
Go
the
ahead.
people in the church and the people in the kingdom.
Yeah.
All of it.
Right.
He's got it.
He's got it. Yep. This train of thought brought up a verse, Romans 14:8. For if we live, I mean, the young men and even Daniel here in a little while could have said the same thing. If we live to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. So then whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. Amen. Whatever, he's got it. He's the one constant through that whole thing, right? And so not only is it valuable for us, absolutely, but also for the people that are going to be able to read this and in circumstances that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. Very good. Very, very good. So in verse 22, and you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. It almost makes you want to go back and say, is Nabonidus really his father? Did somebody get something wrong here? Or
Why does the scripture say that he was?
No, it's just historical record says that Nabonidus was his father, the father of Belshazzar.
How far back, do they say, where do they fit him in there? Where do they put Nebuchadnezzar, and do they say?
Nebuchadnezzar is up here on the list earlier, and then that guy,
How far down?
and then Belteshazzar.
Right, but how is it long, how many years is it between the two?
I'm not sure, right? I'm not, but not a lot, because you're talking about one dies and then is succeeded. Okay, so it's not a big gap of time. It's succession, right? So anyway, I'm going to have to keep looking into that because that just bugs me.
So does that fall into a sort of a goofy example that Abraham is the father of all?
Well, see, there's another one. Yeah, that's another.
In other words, Nebuchadnezzar was a big dude in the world around him. He was big, right? Could he be referred to as the father of everyone beyond the kings?
Yeah, kind of like to say, if there wasn't a Nebuchadnezzar, there wouldn't be a Belshazzar.
Yeah.
See, that's what I think. Because genealogically, Nabonidus is his father. But then one person says, no, forget it. No one forgive you. Yeah. Let's get back to the story. Okay. Yeah, and so you, his son Belteshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. Okay. That's the thing. Okay. Now, remember the occasion. In my perception, it's my intuition, the way I feel the presence of Belshazzar is that he's a weak man. That's just the impression that I get of him. So he's having a party, and not only with men, but brings in the lords and your wives and concubines. Now, think about, now this is later, because later on, King Artaxerxes or Ahasuerus is going to be over the Persian Empire, and he's going to marry Esther. And you remember how Esther starts? And Vashti, the king's wife, and they were having this, and so he wants her to come in. Now she's with the women, and he wants her to come in there, and she says, no, I'm not doing that, okay? Because that, for Belshazzar to have the women in here just shows a level of degradation that was present under his oversight. Okay, because that was not done. It just wasn't. And that's why Vashti wasn't having it. I mean, she's, her queenship is over, right? I mean, she lost that, and she was, with everything that happened with her over that. But the point is that it just is an illustration of the fact that just wasn't something that was done, okay? But be that as it may. And so this is Daniel kind of setting things up before he answers the question or makes the interpretation of their handwriting. And he says here, and so your wives, and this is in verse 23, and your concubines have drunk from them, and you have praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, who do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, your life breath, okay, and whose are all your ways, okay? Every step you take is because he lets you take that step. You have not honored, okay? And in fact, he has dishonored. He has insulted in the deepest way possible. Then he says, okay, so now that he has kind of set things up for him, then he says, from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Farsin. Now, in the NASB, it says Upharsin, and the U is the conjunction and. So that's why there's a difference in these translations. So it's saying the same thing. So this is the interpretation of the matter. So I have a little chart up here that we can look at. Really, the verb part is what we kind of see kind of the origin from the noun and then the verb up here. So mene, so it means to number. So he says that twice The prevailing wisdom is that for emphasis, okay? And so what we're going to see is that the days of his rule have been numbered, okay? So many, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. It's going to last that much longer than it's done, okay? This is the interpretation, okay. 27, tekel, and so on the chart, the Aramaic spelling of a shekel, so tekel means to weigh, okay? So to weigh. And of course, a shekel was a measurement of weight. And so to weigh, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Okay, so if you go to the store, in my crude little illustration here, for a pound of hamburger, and they put it on the scale, and it's not a pound of hamburger, then what's the problem? I'm going to charge you for a pound of hamburger, but, okay, well, what I put on this, in other words, there is a standard, and that not quite pound of hamburger is not up to the standard, okay? And so you have been measured by a standard, and you have been found wanting. You're not meeting it, okay? Which is quite sobering. It's quite sobering if that was all that was to it. Because what I'm thinking here is, my thought was, man, I'm sure glad that perfection isn't the standard, all right? You know, in and of ourselves. Perfection is the standard, and we meet that standard in Christ, but in ourselves, we can't meet it. Okay, and so Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So Perez is the singular form of Upharsin or Parson, okay? And your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So numbered, weighed, and divided, okay? This is the decree of God. Now, they're in green on the right column. Peres, this is going back to the original language, as such also means the Persian, okay, or Persians. And that's why Daniel got out of this writing the fact that the kingdom would be given to the Medes and the Persians, okay? It's contained within that writing, okay? And so this was the decree, because he didn't learn from what had gone before. His heart was lifted up in pride. And, you know, you look at this and, you know, it's easy to say, well, why didn't he learn from what happened to his father? I hate that. It's kind of like Hebrews and Paul, you know. Well, Paul, no, I mean the Hebrew writer, you know. But he didn't learn from that. And you look at the party that he threw. So he's got 1,000, I don't know if that's a literal 1,000, but let's just go with it. 1,000 of his lords and nobles, and they bring out these utensils from the sacked temple of Yahweh and mock Yahweh as a god. Now, I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that they had any kind of conception of a god other than an idol. You know, and even when you think about some of the rulers that we'll talk about later who wanted to be regarded as gods, you know, the Caesars and the Ptolemies and the Seleucids and others that wanted to be viewed as gods. You say, well, how in the world could they think to pull that off? Well, you have to understand that their perception of a God was, it was base. It wasn't, a high and lofty kind of a thing. Okay, and so it's not a huge thing that they would want to be regarded as gods because their perception of a God was very low. But Belshazzar is insulting and challenging Yahweh as a God. In his mind, he's just another God. And look, we went and conquered his city and sacked his temple and took all his stuff out, and now we're just going to treat it, like nothing, like, no respect, no honor whatsoever. And we're going to see some rulers when we get into chapter 7 and following. We're going to see some rulers that are going to fit. They're going to be just that the people will be able to relate to as they read this. Okay, same kind of attitudes, arrogance, and puffed up and think they are going to run the world. So we'll come back to some of that as we see that. Then Belteshazzar, verse 29, gave command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. So, Daniel didn't bother. He had told him, keep your gifts to yourself and whatnot. But Daniel he was an extremely wise person. And one of the things that we should understand at this point in time is that Daniel has been in captivity for 67 years. Okay? So he's 67 years old plus however old they were when they came to Babylon. So the Babylonians came in 606, and that's when Daniel and his friends were taking the cream of the crop. So for 67 years, so he's been doing this a long time, And chapter 6, as we go into chapter 6, that becomes, there's something remarkable about that, because in all that 67 years that he's been in captivity, no one had ever had anything that would stand up bad or wrong about Daniel. Okay, and so as far as his work is concerned, we're going to see that these men in chapter 6 are they're trying to bring him down, but they can't do it if it has anything to do with how he's running the government affairs. He's absolutely faithful in those things, and they can't get him on anything. So we're going to go into that here forthwith. So they clothed Daniel with purple, gold chain around his neck, proclamation made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed. Okay. He was killed. Okay. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So now we're at 539 BC, and the Medes and the Persians now have taken over this realm. Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
I'll try to restrain myself from all of the comments and ideas I had. I'll try to use, I think, the most applicable one about that I think fits into all of this really, but has to do with Nebuchadnezzar, the father of Belshazzar. Nebuchadnezzar's name means something like Nabu, protect my heir. And Nabu was the son of Marduk, the primary god, but was the god of writing, and his symbol was like a stylus and a tablet, and what he controlled was the tablet of fate. So one, I think there's a political thing is Belshazzar, because all of the other kings, especially his father, were not good. He doesn't want to identify with any of those. So he's going God is also using that because he's saying, and Daniel even says that Nebuchadnezzar, your father, so every time they're saying that, basically, so your father, Nabu protected his heir, um, which Belshazzar is claiming to be that now. And then what happens? Well, a hand appears and writes his fate on the wall.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And who can interpret it? But it's Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is all fitting into that first slide you had of that it's God Most High, and He is controlling
Mm-hmm.
the fates of men and the fates of the nations, and everything is working according to His will,
Mm.
not Nabu's, not Nebuchadnezzar's, not Belshazzar's, but it's God, and it's the people He works through, like are shaping that.
Well said. Yeah, good stuff. Teamwork. Good job.
Can I throw in a bonus?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
So I also think it seems really weird to me that it makes a major point out of saying the hand appeared opposite the lampstand.
Hmm.
So what lampstands? Well, it just talked about
Oh. Mm.
they brought in the items of the temple.
Mm.
Exodus is you even talked about last time how insulting it is for a God who gave meticulous directions for creating the articles of the temple and for placing them, for Belshazzar to do this. God specifically directed that the lampstand be made. In Exodus, it words it as you place it on the one wall so that it shines
Mm-hmm.
on the opposite wall,
Mm-hmm.
which is where the bread of the presence was. And so the bread, and I mean, and that could be a whole other topic, but what does the bread of the presence symbolize? And so this wall is vacant now. The lampstand that you just brought in to party and drink alcohol out of
Mm-hmm.
is shining on the wall where your fate is inscribed,
Mm-hmm.
not, should have been the wall where symbols of your relationship and covenant with God.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, now see, I never ever caught that the lampstand part. Yeah, because that's what he had in there, the utensils from the, yeah, good stuff. Wow. Okay. Better look a little more closely next time. No, that's really good. Thank you for that. That's really good stuff. Okay, all right, so here we go. In chapter 6, this is where chapter 5 should end. The Hebrew text indicates a break. Swift punishment could be a good lesson for the whole nation. What happened here would shortly be known throughout the entire realm. Okay, so everybody's going to hear about this, and it should have an impact. Okay, so we just keep right on flowing here. Now the Darius the Mede has received the kingdom, and in the scheme of things, as we talk about the goals of the governor, the one that's running things, having to do with the king not suffering loss, and so we're going to get a glimpse into how things were run here a little bit and where Daniel fit in here. So it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to go throughout the whole kingdom. Satraps are sort of governors. Okay, governor is probably the closest word we have. Over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps would give account so that the king might not suffer loss. So that the king, so this is a dictatorship, just the king, and it's in the financial area. I have on my computer, I didn't put the computer up tonight, but when I was looking at this and looking at Daniel's reputation, there was an article in the paper today of a lady who was fired. The governor of Washington fired this lady. She was over a certain agency, and they had, like, I don't know, was it $2 million or something I think it was 2. It seems like a little these days, doesn't it? But anyway, she had this amount of money that's given to this program, and it turns out that like maybe only half of the money was being used, and there's 23 positions open for in this organization, and there's 7 vacancies, and people are coming and going. So they just weren't happy with her work. So they it says they gave her the option to resign, but she chose separation. So that's a new term now for being fired. Okay, so yeah, so they fired her. So anyway, that just kind of caught I read that in the morning, and then I was studying this here, reading Daniel 6, and that caught my attention. But with Daniel, we're going to see just the very, very opposite. Okay, he knows what he's doing, and he does it really well, which is not always the best. Okay, depending on the circumstances you're in a certain way. It is good, but sometimes it can get you in trouble, is the point. So then this Daniel became...
He had a lot of experience at that, though.
Yeah, see? Yeah, because see, he's got... When you first read about these young men coming into Babylon, so they're royalty, they are extremely intelligent. They received the best training in the languages of the Babylonians, probably Sumerian and Babylonian, and these really intricate languages. They're able to communicate internationally. I mean, so yeah, and with all that, 60 some years of experience, or at least 60, ish years of experience. Yeah, and so he's a real asset. And if you think about Darius's demeanor during this ordeal that we're going to be reading about, you see that reflected. Okay, so we'll see that. That's a really, really important point. This Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So who did it say? Where did Daniel get this excellent spirit? Where did he get his wisdom? Remember, God gave them these things, right? And of course, it reminds me of when the Israelites were coming out of Egypt, and when it came to the construction of the tabernacle, and how God gave certain individuals ability to work in different metals and things like that, right? And so the same thing, God is the one who was behind this excellent spirit, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. He saw his value, okay? And so they, in verse 4, sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, okay? Because, he's like, man, he's just going right up the ladder, so to speak. He's going to set him over the whole thing, and these guys are not liking it. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault. That's why that article kind of grabbed me, because you read this and hey, that lady, man, she was like the opposite. They found all kind of fault with her. They fired her, And I wish her the best, absolutely. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful. Okay? So you think about God giving us certain abilities, and as he had with Daniel, and Daniel was faithful in the carrying out of his duties according to the gifts and abilities that God had granted him. He was faithful in that, okay? Because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him, okay? So it's good to be faithful, and it's good to excel in the place, blossom where you're planted. That's good, period. But in certain circumstances, it can cause you trouble, okay? So we have some jealousy, okay? So remember, jealousy is where you believe that something is being taken away from you, okay? Okay? Something is being taken away from you. And so
Which is kind of a core theme very quickly that we're going to see in Esther.
oh yeah,
That's a driving force of what is causing their reactions is this
yeah,
concern that I'm going to
oh,
lose my place here.
yep,
Right.
yeah. Same thing, for sure. So they decided that they're not going to find any accusation against Daniel when it comes to the matters of the kingdom, because he's doing that very well. We should not find any ground for complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. All right. So there's a little comparison here that might help us a little bit along the way. So in Daniel, a comparison of Daniel 3 and 6, Daniel's or dangers encountered by members of God's kingdom, dangers encountered by members of God's kingdom. Okay. And then now in Daniel 3, that wasn't persecution, I say here, as such. There was a sharp contrast between two rival gods, if you will. So you had those young men who were saying, in essence, we serve our God and we're not going to serve yours. And so it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar's, at least it appears to me, main objective to persecute those young men. But here, in this case, it is persecution with the avowed intention of disposing of one who is hated and envied. So this is persecution, okay? So it's Cain and Abel comes to mind, right? But I won't belabor that. But you can see the similarity there. Okay, so this is just out and out persecution that's going on here. So they come to the king and look, you know about what they did with these satraps and these governors. They came, officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever. And all the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects, satraps, counselors, governors have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions." Now, he's going to sign it. Now, what does it seem is motivating his signing hand? Any god beside you, O king, I'll sign that. Pride? Okay. That word again? Okay. Because when you read this, if you just do a surface reading of this, it's like, why in the world would you just do that? Well, see, I think he's done it before. They brought something to him and he'll sign it. And so they do this again. They seem to have all confidence that he would. Now will king establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Yeah. Now here's a little side note. So When we lived when I was preaching in Pasco, there was a group there that I met with on Tuesdays. They were Baptists. And, baptism was something that they vigorously opposed to the point of, I went there one night and we had baptized somebody that day. And of course, I'm like, oh, somebody baptized. It looked like, it looked like somebody had punched them in the stomach. Literally. They looked sick. Okay. So the last night I went there, the baptism came up, and the preacher came by. He walked by me with a Bible, and he put it down and he pointed to this verse: "The law of the Medes and the Persians cannot be revoked," and walked away. I know, right?
Oh, now I see.
Yeah. Oh, what was I thinking? And the only thing that I can piece together, if I try to spin that, what was he thinking? So he's saying that maybe that like we're saved by grace through faith, and God is not going to change his mind. I don't know. That whether you're baptized or not baptized, that's the basis of salvation, and nothing is going to change that. Okay, that's the only thing I could get, and that's the last time I went. I just like I couldn't do it anymore. Because how do you yeah. But anyway, I just threw that in there because it's just one of the most bizarre experiences I've had. All right, so verse 9, Darius signed a document and injunction. There you go. It's on the books. Can't change it. Anybody breaks it, that's what's going to happen to them, and that's it. And so Daniel knew the document had been signed. He went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Now, what would you have thought if Daniel said, "Oh man, things are getting kind of hot around here, so I'm going to duck somewhere where nobody can see me and pray"? What would you think about that? I know what he would think about it. He wasn't going to do it. And the point is made. He did just like he had always done and prayed to God openly, right? And so I'm looking for if in this verse in documented sign toward Jerusalem. By the way, when it talks about in 1 Kings and here and other places like in Jonah, where the prayer prays toward Jerusalem, the main thought is that you're praying toward Jerusalem in your mind. Praying toward Jerusalem physically was it's kind of a natural. I could see that when you pray toward this place. Did God not hear people's prayers if they prayed but they weren't facing Jerusalem, you think? Yeah. It wasn't that physical, primarily the physical positioning of your, the direction you're looking in. It's in your mind. You're praying toward God's temple, the seat of his power, the seat of his presence. Okay? But praying in this position toward Jerusalem, we can see that could be very natural to do. It's 8 o'clock already. Do we have till 8:15? No, we don't have 8:15. Okay. I thought it was 8:15. Well, I was just getting warmed up, but looks like class is done. So we'll go ahead and pick up with the signing of the document, and then we'll see what happens from there. Okay. So and I would suggest that you maybe read chapters 7 and 8 somewhere along the line. Just get familiar with what's in there. And we're going to start getting into some imagery, and it'll be fun. So anyway, with that,